Hello and welcome. Welcome to Diverse Conversations. This is Ashka Patel. Thank you very much for joining me today as we continue our conversation exploring sustainability in healthcare and pharmacy. Today, our guest of the day for episode number 4 is none other than Shellyza Sajwani. Shellyza is a clinical pharmacist at the Ottawa Hospital, and she completed her Master's of Pharmacy at Aston University in 2010 and her PharmD at the University of Toronto in 2018, and identifies as a clinical pharmacist specializing in oncology, global health, and climate change. She completed a climate and health certification from Yale University and a global health delivery intensive program from Harvard University, representing one of the only pharmacists in both of those cohorts. She currently serves as the national co-chair of the newly founded Canadian Association of Pharmacy for the Environment, or CAPhE, and also works with the International Pharmaceutical Federation as co-chair in their Environmental Sustainability Initiative Policy Committee. She is also the chair of the Ottawa Hospital Pharmacy Environment Committee and has experience working as previous co-president of the Pharmacists Without Borders Canada and as current oncology, palliative, and palliative care pharmacist at Ottawa Hospital. A little bit about CAPhE. CAPhE is a volunteer-run organization with a focus of helping pharmacy professionals in improving planetary health. And let's now hear from Shellyza in terms of what is the work that they're doing at CAPhE, and also more importantly, what got her started in the first place, and why do we need to incorporate sustainability moving forward in everything that we do. Before we go and meet Shellyza, I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for taking this time to listen into these conversations, and be sure to hit that like button and subscribe below so that we know you're liking this content, and it helps us motivates us to bring more of such content for you. Thank you for your support. Stay tuned. All right, well, now we have Shellyza joining us. Shellyza, thank you so much for taking this time to be with us today and, share about the incredible work that you're leading. Trust me when I say this, when I found out about the work that you are doing, it really was an inspiration because, finally somebody in the pharmacy space was giving this work due attention. Before I speak further about it, I would love to hear it from you. And maybe one of the first places that we can get started is, kind of tell us about your journey into sustainability. How did that all start in the first place?
Sure, yeah. And I just also want to mention that, I've been very lucky to have some great opportunities, but I also have a amazing co-chair specifically for CAPhE, and we have an incredible team that has come together across the country, and a lot of people basically putting in work within their own expertise in order to really move the ship forward. So it's really exciting to see, and I'm kind of inspired by how the team is progressing. So I can talk a little bit. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about my journey.
Sure.
So I have always been very, very interested in social inequities, specifically as they relate to health. My parents were both refugees who became refugees at a very young age.
Wow.
And because of that, I've always been very interested in health as a global concept.
Right.
So I got involved with global health beginning in 2017, and with some rotations with the University of Toronto when I was doing my bridging PharmD, like the post-bac PharmD.
Yeah.
And eventually ended up going into Pharmacists Without Borders and doing a lot of work there within the leadership and helping to build infrastructure there, another amazing team as well. And what I started noticing is that how vulnerable global health was to the increasing effects of climate change. Climate change is basically battering global health, whether it is the changing patterns of malaria to the heat waves to changing sea levels. All of this is having a very, very big impact on global health and on individual families within that global health setting. And then I also started noticing at the same time that this wasn't necessarily specifically just a low-income country thing or an incidence, something that's just kind of happening in the future and not happening now. Right. You can see the impact of, for example, just within the last few years, the impact of forest fires in the West and now even in Ontario, the impact of storms in the Atlantic provinces, the big heat dome that happened in BC that had a massive effect and
Yes.
a big mortality as well. And we can really see that health is now starting to be impacted across the country, with Canada specifically. So I basically thought, from a global health perspective, I'm sitting in a country that has one of the biggest per capita emissions around the world. And that is having a big impact on global health. And there's some impact to my own country as well at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So moving towards climate change was basically a very logical conclusion from all of that realization. So I started realizing that the healthcare system actually has a bigger emissions burden than the airline industry.
Yes.
And I'll say that again. I know it's great, we both know this, but I feel like this fact is really not well known to major, to the public, right? The healthcare system has a very massive emissions burden. And medications actually count for a quarter of all of that, all of that big emissions burden. So because of that, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians have a really massive role to play. And whether we want to, whether we would kind of volunteer to be at that level or not, medications, are our responsibility, and health is our responsibility. So therefore, it kind of makes sense that unfortunately we are, just as we were at the front lines of the pandemic, we are now at the front lines of this.
Agreed.
However, this presents an excellent opportunity for us to really, kind of take the reins and think, how can we reduce emissions, but also how can we protect pharmacy, protect patient health from the impacts of climate change as well.
Yes.
And there's a lot of work that can happen both in climate change mitigation as well as climate change adaptation, and more broadly, environmental sustainability as it relates to pollution, because that impacts health as well.
Right. That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that tidbit, and what a way to open this conversation, because truly that was one of the motivations, right, behind even starting the series in the first place. Is oftentimes I think we get away in healthcare with our responsibility to the environment under the disguise of patient safety, and we have concerns that if single-use plastics and all of those behaviors cannot be changed because it might somehow lead to concerns with patient safety. But that's not the case, because we live in such advanced times where we have lots of technology available, and I know we'll touch on a lot of those aspects today. But thank you for bringing that up and kind of presenting that statistics, because that gives us a very realistic picture in terms of what is the burden healthcare is putting on in terms of the environmental change that we are seeing at present, and will become much more of a bigger concern as the years pass by. And what is our responsibility as healthcare providers and as pharmacists in particular, as you mentioned, to curb that, right, and be the leaders and drivers of that, rather than kind of following the lead, if I may say so. So, as we talk about this, I guess one of the first questions that I have for you is, before we kind of go into the solutions and the amazing work that you and your team are leading at CAPhE, what are some of the impacts to understand the problem, right? Like, what are some of the impacts of climate change on human health? And, what is the cost if we don't choose sustainability as we are making these decisions moving forward?
Sure. Yeah. So there's huge effects to health right now. If you would like to kind of link a resource in this podcast, the WHO and CDC both have really good diagrams showing the impact of climate change specifically to human health. So, for example, increased heat causes worsened cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. Another effect, of course, is the effect of mental health on the younger generations, but also post-natural disasters as well, when there's been an effect to an economic impact, or an impact to one's basically livelihood, one's the way where someone is living. If they have to get evicted, for example, then that will have a really big impact as well. A third impact is to infectious diseases. So, for example, you may have there's a situation where, the floods in Pakistan, for example, that caused a lot of damage of infrastructure.
Mhm.
But what a lot of people then realize is that when you have water that is just sticking around for a long time, and you have people engaging with that dirty water, then what you have is incidences of cholera, for example.
Right.
And even in Canada, for example, you can have changes in infectious diseases that weren't necessarily anticipated or there in the past.
Mhm.
In East Africa, which is another example, you have differences in patterns of malaria. You may have malaria in places that you didn't have it previously because the heat actually affects how a mosquito will reproduce, for example.
Absolutely.
Some other effects as well. A big one that a lot of people talk about is air pollution.
Mm.
So when you have your forest fires, the forest fire smoke actually it has a lot of long-term detriment with regards to the impact on lung cancer, the impact on respiratory conditions. Now, this isn't something that is specifically related to emissions, but it's related specifically to the air pollution that is caused by forest fires, which are worsened because of climate change. So everything is basically connected.
Right.
I want to mention plastic pollution specifically because plastic pollution, so when we talk about single-use plastic, that is not specifically a directly climate change related issue, although it does overlap. So plastic basically causes plastic pollution, right?
Right.
Which has specific kind of carcinogens in it, and can cause some downstream effects as well.
Right.
Similarly, medication pollution, even though it's not a climate change specific, at least not direct, there's some overlap, but it's not a direct issue. It can cause issues with, for example, antimicrobial stewardship.
Right.
Because if you have antibiotics that are in the environment, you have issues with antimicrobial stewardship. So this is a massive, massive issue. And that's why we like to talk about climate change and planetary health in one massive kind of umbrella.
Agreed. And you put it so nicely because it kind of feeds into the cycle, right? Like these they may be not directly impacting the climate change per se, but they feed into the cycle and they keep the cycle and they don't break the cycle. That's the unfortunate part. But the key is what we are looking for is breaking the cycle so that we stop somewhere, but we are not really finding that solution. So thank you so much for leading that. And we'll certainly link the resources that you mentioned in our description box below as well, just so that, our audience is able to have a chance to look at them. And, as we are now kind of moving in that direction. So, how did CAPhE start? And what was it? What is the goal that you're trying to achieve, or what are the challenges that you're trying to address through this association?
Sure. So CAPhE basically started with a bunch of us getting in touch via QID, which is the platform that the Canadian Society of Hospital Pharmacists use, and a number of other organizations are starting to use as well. And many of us were starting to do work in our own settings. So, for example, at the Ottawa Hospital, there's an environmental stewardship pharmacy committee, for example. Similarly, in other settings, there have been other small committees that have been created. But what we wanted is a way for all of us to be able to come together and learn from each other. We also wanted a way to be able to educate other pharmacists and pharmacy technicians about the impact and help them understand what they can do in their own settings as well. And to try to kind of develop partnerships with larger bodies in order to kind of influence large scale trends with regards to climate change in pharmacy. So a really good example is we were, through making this organization, we were able to get in touch with CSHP, CPHA, and also organizations like the Canadian Coalition in Green Healthcare, Cascades, and through partnerships, we've been able to develop some kind of really good deliverables that can help bring the conversation forward and also help with regards to implementation science as well.
That's amazing. And it's great to hear that, these collaborations are happening, because it's critical, I think, more than ever to have that collaboration going on, because that's the only way this such a big problem can be addressed, right? Is by breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. So if I were to, if we were to summarize, the various initiatives that you maybe, if you were to highlight a few that are, kind of ongoing right now, and I guess what is the impact that we can expect? Because I know this it's just a newly formed association, so I know you're establishing it, but I would love to kind of share this message, just so that if anyone is interested in this area, they can certainly reach out to you and your team, and also be part of this cause that is so critical that we all put in our bits. So if you were to summarize some of your impacts or goals that you want to achieve through this work.
Sure. Yeah, I'll also mention, it's good that you mentioned that that it's a newly formed organization. I would say that myself and my co-chair got in touch probably around a year ago.
Wow.
And all of the co-leads were recruited. Like the majority of the co-lead recruitment occurred between June 2022 to like September, October 2022,
Wow.
with the last ones being confirmed in January. But despite that, I think because we are rightly placed at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we've had immense momentum and have actually completed some deliverables. So an example would be the Cascades recently came up with a pharmacy playbook specifically on how to implement initiatives with it from a pharmacy perspective. And we basically collaborated with them to create that. We had a lot of consultants coming in from CAPhE who basically influenced the creation of the playbook. So that was a massive win for us, in the sense that it really helped to establish us from a pharmacy perspective within the wider kind of sustainable health system, infrastructure and movement. Right. Another big one would be CSHP. So we have collaborated with them to create a sustainability task force, which has now created a list of recommendations that is relevant for hospital pharmacists kind of across the country. So that is, and that task force will really now shape CSHP's response to climate change.
That's so incredible.
There's a lot of movement that's happening kind of behind the scenes. We've also presented to several organizations as well in order to try to establish pharmacy and educate others on pharmacy's kind of central role. So some of the places we've presented to include Health Pro, the Drug Use Evaluation Group, the Canadian Coalition in Green Healthcare, and Cascades. We've also presented to CSHP. We've presented to about 4 universities so far with regards to pharmacy-specific areas to think about, how do you educate students on the role that climate plays with regards to pharmacy. So there's a lot of traction that is happening. What we are also trying to do is, through education, is influence kind of grassroots projects that are happening on the ground in various areas. I think we're still a young organization. So I think where we need to go is continuing to advance with regards to education, identifying and helping to identify opportunities with regards to research, helping to kind of be consultants for various areas. And really, I think the end goal will eventually be, how do you see accreditation evolving? How do you see legislation evolving? And I can't really give a timeline for that, because again, we are quite we're one player, right?
Yes.
But I feel like in general, the conversation it tends to move in that direction over a period of a long-term period, of several years, for example. And that will really depend on how we continue to evolve as an organization. But for now, I would say that our focuses are education, communication, research, and most of all, partnership.
That's incredible. I mean, you are a brand new organization, but look at what you have already achieved. And I'm certain that the next 5 years are going to be critical, because we'll definitely need the expertise that your group brings because this is a topic we don't really understand, and I think it's a whole new way of thinking that needs to be developed to even think about sustainability. And for example, simple thing like community pharmacy. Like, if I'm working in a community pharmacy, like for me to think sustainably, it's like, what is the amount of medications that are being expired? How can I change procurement? Like, in hospitals, for example, I know that, that's some of the work that you may already be doing, especially like, with professionals who have an interest in sustainability are already looking into this, but nobody's looking at this from a community lens point. And let's be honest, that's also where a lot of these medications are being dispensed. But are we really looking at that? And we don't even have a proper way of thinking about that. So I'm certain that we'll definitely be tapping into this expertise that your group brings to kind of develop these tools and toolkits in the near future. And the impact you've already achieved, and this is like year 1. I'm certain by year 5 we'll be seeing CAPhE at a whole new level, involved in a lot of national work as well. And I commend you and your team, because it's no small feat for what you have all achieved in such a short time. I think just a leading question to that is, if somebody wants to get involved with CAPhE, what are some roles and opportunities that are available? If you want to just put a shout out for that, and where can they find out more about it?
Yeah, so right now we have just kind of completed the recruitment of all of our co-leads. However, they will be reaching out, like they will be needing their own committees, for example.
Right.
Like they're hard at work working on their separate initiatives. But as we continue to grow, considering especially right now it's a volunteer-based organization, they're going to need various individuals. And so therefore, emailing would be a great option. We also have a call for interest form, which we can send to you, that we can kind of put, make available, so that when opportunities do arise, basically one is able to indicate one's availability on those on that particular form. Another thing that would be good for individuals to do just more generally with regards to this area is to educate oneself.
Yes.
So I can give you links, if you'd like, of various resources to be able to understand climate change's impact on health, as well as the role that pharmacists and pharmacy technicians play within environmental sustainability more broadly. My co-chair, Caitlin Roy, has created a really great article, which I tend to send to different people. So we can certainly make that available if you'd like. The other thing is, so education is a really big one. And then the second is to think about what can one do in one's own specific setting. Yes. So with regards to community pharmacy, for example, there's some easy wins with regards to energy, with regards to lighting, for example. And then the second is how to kind of come together with other community pharmacists with environmental sustainability more broadly, not specifically climate change, but environmental sustainability more broadly. There's a lot of opportunities to think about, how do you reduce plastic, for example, and how do you reduce the amount of other types of resources that would be needed that contribute to that form of pollution as well. So there's a lot of things that a lot of various initiatives that people can take if they want to really move forward specifically within this area. I would also kind of outline the fact that there's opportunities within CAPhE, but if others are involved with, for example, manufacturing, research, for example, there's a lot of really good opportunities. And Cascades has recently posted a position for a pharmacy innovation lead, for example, and I'm finding more and more that there are there's opportunities that are starting to come up with regards
Yes.
to the pharmacists' involvement with climate change, which is really exciting.
It is absolutely. And I was just going like, we were on the right thought. I think we were on the same thought when you were mentioning that, because, I definitely think this is, as you rightly mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, this is a space where pharmacists can really own it and lead it. Because, let's be honest, the statistics is right there. Like we are 20, like, we can potentially curb 25% of this problem, through our involvement, through our expertise that we bring to the table in terms of how can we present other solutions and other ways of thinking. I know you alluded to this a little bit, but I also I see you as a leader in pharmacy, but also in sustainability, for that matter. And it's like, so how do you envision the future of health and pharmacy, especially from a sustainability lens, in the next 5 to 10 years? Like, what are some initiatives that you would like to see take place, which we may not be happening right now? Or, what can we do better to make sure that we're curbing this? And I know, you're already leading that charge, but just from an individual level, if there's anything, or even from a more national level, if how associations can support us with that.
Yeah, I think eventually what the big thing that I can think about is when you have a curve and you think about an engagement curve, right? You get your early adopters, and then you get a topic becomes mainstream. But for something to really be normalized, it has to be regulated. It has to be kind of really incorporated in the day-by-day aspects of being a pharmacist, for example. Right. So if we think about the various bodies that are there, you can have universities, for example, leading the charge with regards to including sustainability-related education in their pharmacy curriculum. You can also have, if I think about, many years in the future, the big thing that would affect, every university, for example, is to include accreditation requirements that have sustainability-related objectives. Right. So that is one big, massive one. Another one is specifically thinking about regulation of community pharmacies and hospital pharmacies, and thinking about key indicators that could take place in order to really move forward. And one can think about this with regards to pharmacy, but also with regards to sustainability and sustainable health systems in general. And I think we can learn a lot from organizations like the NHS in the UK, which has really kind of put forward key objectives with regards to, say, the elimination of desflurane. So desflurane is an anesthetic gas that has a massive emissions burden. They've also put in place a lot of really good, regulation and objectives with regards to MDI inhalers, dose inhalers, which also have a very high emissions burden as well. Right. So the good news is that there are a lot of groups that we can now learn from. Europe is ahead, the UK specifically is ahead, and we don't need to necessarily think of everything from scratch. Right. However, this is going to require all of us to really work together. And this is going to require the pharmacy profession to also work with other entities as well, which I think is happening, is definitely starting to happen, but we're going to have to just continue in this direction. One thing that we also didn't talk about as much, one thing that we also didn't talk about as much, but I think is going to play a bigger and bigger role specifically is adaptation. Right. So, for example, heat waves can cause electronic medical record downtime. Yes. For significant periods of time. So how will we have processes in place to ensure that patients can still get treatment in a hospital setting or even in a community setting, regardless of these types of issues? Another one is natural disasters. So what role will pharmacies play with regards to natural disasters? How can they ensure that they're still keeping up their patient care despite impacts? Another one is supply chain management. So how can you ensure that despite a disruption in supply chain management that comes from a climate event, how can one have a resiliency of the supply chain? So these are big questions, but they're going to require a lot of different types of people to come together and to really work together. And that's basically where I see pharmacy going.
Absolutely. Wow, you hit on quite a few important topics, I must say. And one thing that I think we also did not get a chance to reflect much on is deprescribing, right? As more and more healthcare providers are getting this authority to prescribe, I think the burden to deprescribe also increases significantly because, as you mentioned earlier in your conversation, medication pollution is also another factor that we need to keep in mind in terms of how much medication are we actually using, and one, is this appropriate? And two, are there opportunities to deprescribe? And, this is where I see this whole expert group that needs to come together to really look at that supply chain from all different angles and really figure out, where do we need interventions? And I'm pretty sure right now interventions are needed at each of the steps. But and again, this is where collaboration and, everyone stepping up and just putting that thought process, as you mentioned, look at our own practices and see how can we incorporate sustainable mindset and making sure that we start integrating some of those changes. And I guess last question as we wrap up this conversation is for anyone who's looking to kind of implement these sustainable solutions, what advice do you have for them? What is even a good starting point? Definitely tell you from my perspective, when I started learning about this, I was like lost. I was like, where do I even start? And, what do I even do? So it would be great to hear from you in terms of what are some good resources to get started on?
Yeah. At first, I'm really glad you brought up the topic of deprescribing because I think it's going to become more and more critical. I currently work within, medical oncology and palliative care, and this is something that we're, constantly thinking about from a patient goals of care perspective. But I think this has really, really good synergy with regards to climate change specifically because, medication deprescribing, so making sure that the right medication goes to the right patient and you don't necessarily have to have, vitamin C in a patient who has a 3-month prognosis.
Yes.
So thinking about all of these different things, I think is very, 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 very important. But to answer your question with regards to starting points, the first thing first myth I would challenge is that these issues are too big for an individual to have an impact.
Right.
I think one thing I've learned through both global health and climate change work is that when you come together, there's no issue that is too big and that you can actually make an impact. The fact that you can hear this podcast or watch this podcast means that you're living in a set of circumstances, which means that you have more power than a lot of people. And I think that, we are sometimes sent messages that are particularly targeted from organizations that don't necessarily want climate change to move forward, such as, industries, for example, that don't necessarily want climate change to move forward, to say that, we're now in a doomsday situation, for example, and there is nothing that can be done. Either that the issue is not an issue that it needs to be dealt with right now, or the complete opposite, that it is nothing can actually be done.
Right.
And I would actually challenge these messages and try to understand, okay, why are these messages, being sent and being, they basically paralyze action.
Right.
And once you are able to challenge that, you're able to really think about what you specifically can do. The second question I would ask you is that, why do we want to do it? It may be if one is a If one is a parent, it may be for one's children, for example.
Right.
If one is a non-parent, like myself, it may be because you just want to see something better specifically for loved ones and also for humanity as well.
Absolutely.
And I think that there is a role for all of us here. And there is
Agreed.
a role for whoever's listening to this, for
Mm-hmm.
you specifically here. The second thing that I would start thinking about is, okay, now you know that you can make an impact, and now you know why you want to make an impact. Now think about steps. So the first is education.
Right.
Think about the pharmacist's involvement, the pharmacy technician's involvement specifically to climate change and plastic pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And with that education, I think I mentioned Caitlin Roy's article, some other resources that we will have with regards to courses that you can take. With that, start thinking about what can you do on an individual level within your particular setting and how you can be in touch with others that can kind of help you and guide you in this area.
Absolutely.
And really come together.
Absolutely. I agree. Like collaboration, I think, you definitely hit the nail there. Collaboration and awareness. And I think awareness only comes when we want, educate ourselves to, what is the ground reality of things, and not necessarily, always questioning, what we are hearing, especially in this day and age where social media, and we all know how prevalent misinformation is, and how easy it is to be a target of misinformation even. It becomes a lot more important for us to make sure that we equip ourselves with the right information and the right knowledge so that we could ask all these questions. And as you rightly mentioned, identify that why, right? Like the why becomes our driving force in terms of why we are coming together to work towards this change and change the way we practice as a profession, and as an industry. At a point in time, it will have those rippling changes on an industry level as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. And I think that's really it's again, I can't help but go back to that time when I started into this topic, and I was like, why are we even not talking about this? And, why is this not mainstream? Why, and it's incredible that I have had this opportunity to meet such amazing leaders, including yourself, through this interview series. And it warms my heart to know that we have such passionate leaders like yourself who are leading this cause. And obviously we are here to support as best as we can, which includes spreading this message to as many people as we can. And we'll definitely be referencing all your work down below. So anyone who wants to reach out to you, including that expression of interest form, would love to put it down so that if anyone, if there's opportunities that open up, I'm sure people would love to contribute. And as we wrap up this conversation, Shellyza, I would love to, any parting message, advice that you may have for our listeners, anything to motivate them into taking that first step, because I know it's the first steps that's always the hardest to take in any journey whatsoever.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is with regards to CAPhE specifically, I'm glad, we will have that form available, and we can also share our constitution and outreach letter, and that the website will be coming out in September, which is really exciting as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah. In terms of parting messages, I would say I would have three parting messages. Again, the first is remember your why. The second is remember that you are not too small. And the third is reach out and collaborate.
Agreed. And thank you so much for that. And, once again, thank you for taking this time to have this conversation. I know you have been a little under the weather as well, but thank you for braving that and, for still continuing to be a trooper that you are. It's been my absolute pleasure and honor to have had this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I can't wait to release this to the rest of our audience. Thank you so much, Shellyza. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, we wrap up episode number 4, but stay tuned for next week because we have one more episode to go before we wrap up the series. Till then, bye-bye. Before we move forward, I just want to also acknowledge Ecolopharm for being our sponsor for the series where we'll be speaking about sustainability in healthcare and in pharmacy. Ecolopharm is a leader in sustainable development. Ecolopharm was the first company to offer pharmacies eco-friendly packaging products for dispensing medications. Their expertise consists in designing and manufacturing the most innovative, sustainable, and eco-friendly packaging solutions in order to help pharmacies reduce their environmental impact. So make sure Ecolopharm has always stood for innovative packaging for a greener future, and we could not be asked for a better partner for the series, as Ecolopharm truly walks the talk and has been a pioneer in the space of creating green pharmacy solutions. It gives us an immense pleasure to be able to partner with Ecolopharm to bring forward the series to you. And I hope you enjoy the series and learn from it, and hopefully implement some of the solutions we discuss here, as it will truly help our planet, especially curb climate change and make sure that we're able to leave a greener planet for our future generations. And there you have it. You heard it from Shellyza in terms of why sustainability is so important in making sure that we are keeping our health in check, and how climate change also has a significant impact on our health outcomes. So as you reflect on these conversations, be sure to check out our resources down below that are linked, and also the link to the expression of interest form if you are interested in joining CAPhE in any capacity as a volunteer. Thank you again for taking the time to listen into this conversation. Till next Friday, see you then. Bye-bye.